Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Lunch and Learn webinar with the Urban by Nature Scottish Hub. Urban by Nature is a knowledge sharing and capacity building programme on nature-based solutions created by ICLE Europe. These Lunch and Learn sessions aim to support the integration of nature-based solutions into both national, regional and local communities, as well as promote peer-to-peer knowledge sharing. Each Lunch and Learn session is themed. Today's session is exploring the importance of trees to the physical and cultural environment of urban spaces. Capacity building programs are crucial for developing knowledge and skills on nature-based solutions. For example, sessions such as this Trees for Cities webinar allow us to understand different ecological, social and health values of urban trees, helping us move beyond plans and strategies and begin looking more at implementation, which is urgently needed to improve quality of life in cities. Urban ecosystems play an important role in the EU nature restoration law targets, with an aim of no net loss of urban green space by 2030 and an increase in green urban space by 2040 and 2050. Urban green areas and trees specifically provide essential temperature reduction, absorb excess rainfall, and support physical and mental well-being. The Scottish Urban by Nature Hub is the English-speaking hub out of a community of hubs across the world. There are others in regions as diverse as South Korea, Brazil, the Caucasus, and Spain and the Netherlands. My name is Anna Bracken, and I am chairing the session today. I'm a postdoctoral research associate in spatial ecology at the University of Glasgow, and I'm working on the Gallant project, to which a couple of the other speakers today are also associated. My role is looking at the connectivity of green spaces in the urban area of Glasgow, of which trees play an important part. So today's session will be very interesting to me. I'm going to start by introducing all three speakers for you now, and then we'll start with the talks. So if you have any questions throughout the talks, please put them into the Q&A box at the bottom. I'll keep an eye on them and there'll be a chance to ask the speakers after the talks. So our first speaker today is Dr. Alejandra Vovides, who is an Earth Sciences Research Associate at the University of Glasgow. She believes a major challenge to achieve adaptation to climate change lies in our ability to understand how environmental resources and regulators modulate individual tree architecture, their interactions, and how this affects ecosystem functions. To gain this knowledge, her research bridges multiple disciplines in biology, forestry, coastal, environmental, and computer sciences. She aims to firstly understand the drivers of plant architecture, their interactions and consequent effects. Secondly, to explore the interplay between biotic and abiotic elements that control ecosystem complexity to inform management approaches that prevent ecosystem loss. Thirdly, to develop nature-based solutions for sustainable coastal management and restoration. And fourthly, to identify indicators of ecological restoration to accompany community-based monitoring tools to ensure success. Our second speaker today is Dr. James Bonner, who is an Interdisciplinary Studies Research Associate at the University of Glasgow. James's work considers the social and cultural relations of water and flooding. He also works with the Every Tree Tells a Story project with the University of Strathclyde. He recently completed his doctorate inquiries into the social, cultural, and ecological relationships to and values of water in Malawi. His varied backgrounds includes study, research, and work in social ecological accounting, manufacturing design processes, and active mobility. This has informed a concern for ways that intertwine social, technological, cultural, economic, and aesthetic factors which interrelate in socio-ecological contexts. He is interested in adopting qualitative mapping and mobile research methods that open up, nurture, and communicate human relationships to nature. You'll usually find him on his bike, whether for work or play. Finally, our third speaker, Karina Corada-Perez, is an interdisciplinary environmental chemist at the Sustainability Research Institute at the University of East London. She works as a green infrastructure research assistant, specializing in air pollution. Karina has a master's degree in environmental planning and management from the University of Chile. After working as a researcher and consultant in Chile, she studied for a PhD at the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial College London. Her research focuses on green infrastructures and how they influence urban air quality, helping to inform decision-making for more health-promoting urban environments. Her research offers a comprehensive and up-to-date strategic view of implementing green infrastructures in cities to reduce exposure to air pollutants when obtaining other benefits. Her interest is in supporting the transformation of cities towards a better and healthier environment using strategically green infrastructures. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to our first speaker, Alejandra, who will speak about trees for water more than forest plots.
Hi, everyone. I'll share my screen now. Hannah, can you tell me if you can see the screen properly? Perfect.
I can see the screen, yeah.
All right, so I will be talking about trees for water, more than forest plots. And what I mean by this is how trees are using water and how that can help us manage water. When we talk about forest plots in science, we're basically looking at squares or circles in the forest where we can account for the trees that are there, we identify them, we measure them, we count them. And with several techniques, we can understand what the diversity is in a forest stand, what biomass they are holding, how they use the resources, how they interact with each other, what are their growth rates when you follow them over long periods of time. You can also understand how they help regulate climate, and we can account for green spaces in cities, for example, and understand how they provide ecosystem services, how they function. We know trees provide many ecosystem services. We've already heard from Anna. They can clean carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and provide fresh oxygen for other living beings to breathe. We also heard they can help regulate climate locally and globally. So within a city with a low forest cover or low accounting of trees, cities tend to get really hot. And we know, at least by instinct, that if you go under the shade of a tree, the environment feels so much more fresher. But also in wintertime, they can protect buildings from having lower temperatures than if they were exposed to wind, for example. They provide food, not only for us, but for other living organisms, bees, other insects, birds. They provide refugee squirrels, for example. They are recreational environments that help us feel quite good. And underneath the surface, they can also help us reducing risks of flooding, for example. They promote water infiltration. They speed up nutrient cycling by interacting with other microorganisms. And maybe we have not wondered, or we have, how do they do this? How can they provide all these ecosystem services? It all mostly boils down to sap flow. Sap is the water flowing inside every plant. It's that sweet stuff that you put on your pancakes that comes from maple trees, for example. All trees produce sap. It's a very sugary solution composed mainly by water. And this is how they provide all these ecosystem services. If they cannot absorb carbon through the leaves and convert it into sugar through photosynthesis, they cannot grow new leaves, new branches, or root systems that help give structure to the soil and clean the air and all the things that they do. How does sap move inside a tree, however? Think about trees and water inside the trees as the blood inside an animal. The difference between blood and sap is that plants don't have a heart to pump this water through the tissues. They depend on the atmosphere, on the sun. But through evaporation, it creates like a pool that draws the water from the soil into the roots and up to the stems, just like this image shows right here. This is the basic flow diagram of water inside a tree. The water goes into the roots, flows up the stem, into the branches. Some of that water will be used for photosynthesis, but most of the water will be transpirated to the atmosphere just by evaporation, just to keep the water flowing. In a typical day of a tree, the sun comes out, and as the day gets hotter, the humidity in the atmosphere is a little bit lower and the sap has a greater pull. So it will peak at noon. The highest activity will peak at noon. And then through the evening, the sap flow rates go a little bit further down until midnight, early hours in the morning. They don't typically transport water that much. In a cloudy day, you can see anomalies just like this one up here. So can we say probably that trees sleep at night? Is this a norm, a law for tree water movement? Let's have a look. They interact much more with the soil. It has been recently found that trees can have reverse flow. So instead of having water flow from the roots up to the crowns, it can flow from the crowns down to the root systems and down to the soil. Let's say, for example, there is a dry soil, it's been a drought. If there are deep root systems, they can uptake water from deeper layers of the soil and uplift that water, not only to the crowns, but also to the upper layers of the root system, and they can exudate part of that water to maintain soil moisture. By maintaining this soil moisture, they are also benefiting other plants around the trees that don't have such deep root systems, reducing that water stress for the smaller plants below the canopies. When rain falls, there is a lot of humidity in the atmosphere, there is lower temperatures in the atmosphere, and that uplifting we're talking about is much lower. It can actually become negative and have a reverse flow from the canopies into the root systems. And by providing also structure to the soil, trees can replenish the aquifers and reduce the risk of flooding. This is how they do it. There are different traits for different tree species, different attributes in the leaves, in the stems, and in the root systems that will help control how much the water is, or how fast the water is moving from the canopies into the ground. Some leaves have hairs in them and they are hydrophobic, so they will not absorb water directly. Some other leaves will be hydrophilic and retain some of that water in the leaf surface and actually use it. And this is called foliar water uptake. And they can use this directly on photosynthesis, not needing to necessarily rely on water coming up from the soil up to the crowns. But also there is something that we call stem flow. We have heard for sure that when there is rainfall, canopies catch this water and they reduce the speed at which the water will reach the ground. And this also contributes to reducing erosion on the soil surface. Water also leaks through the leaves to the branches down to the stems, and that dripping to the stems is called stem flow, and it will also be different depending on the attributes of the bark of the trees. Some trees barely have any bark, it's really smooth, and the water will flow really fast down to the ground. But in other trees, like sequoias, for example, they have very spongy barks and they will absorb this water and mine it really slowly into the ground. The depth of the root system can also provide different ways in which water will reach the aquifers or how it will mine, also how it can be uplifted. In arid areas, trees can have such deep root systems that they reach the aquifer, and uplifting water into upper layers of the soil is so much more easier. This we call hydraulic redistribution, the ability to uplift water from deeper soil layers into more superficial ones, promoting soil moisture in upper layers. And so in a city, if you have vegetated areas, you have more an improved infiltration and much lower risk of flooding. You have higher spaces for recreation, more, how to say, plants make everything beautiful, I would say. It's always nice to go through a park and see tons of trees and plants, and people enjoy it much more than being on a city center that is crowded and loud and gray in overall. So what about Glasgow trees? There has been a fantastic study accounting for the number of trees there are in Glasgow, precisely by establishing forest plots all across the city. And what we've learned from that is that about 2 million trees live in the city of Glasgow, storing about 183,000 tons of carbon. Most of these trees, 55% of these trees will be located in parks. Some of them, 12%, will be in residential areas, and amazingly, almost 20% of the trees in the city are located in vacant and derelict land. This is both an opportunity, but also something that we should consider in plan management, because if it's vacant land, it is a land that might be available for development, and trees might be more vulnerable if they are located in vacant and derelict land. Glasgow is good in tree diversity as compared to other cities around the world. It has a higher tree diversity than Edinburgh, for example, or Vancouver or Paris. And it's just close from Cambridge city centre. And of course, most highest diversity within the city will be located in parks and residential areas, as they are the places that hold most of Glasgow city trees. There are a few species in Glasgow, but the most abundant tree species are European ash, oak beech, and alder birch and poplars. Most of these trees are quite tolerant to droughts, but they are also quite good at managing water. And those that are good at retaining water are mostly located along rivers, as we have learned. Now, trees do respond to environmental change. They get stressed when there is a drought. They have threshold tolerances as any other life form, and depending on the species trees, they will have different thresholds of tolerance to either temperature changes, maximum or minimum, to other environmental properties as nutrients, soil attributes, but also to drought. And when we are considering on city tree management, we would like to take into account how trees are using water, how these internal rivers help manage the water of our cities, not only to preserve water storages, but also to manage floodings and sustain a healthy trees growing so that they can tolerate climate change. I think this is for me. I don't know if I used much or a short time, but if you have any questions, I think we will have time for questions.
Thanks, Sally. I think we're going to do a kind of question and answer session at the end of the 3 talks, but that was really
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess we'll just move on to the next speaker then. So the next speaker is Dr. James Bonner, who is talking about his project, Every Tree Tells a Story. So you want to share your screen, James?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen.
Perfect.
Okay, that's been slideshow. Is that okay?
Yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
Thanks. Hello. So I'm going to talk to you about Every Tree Tells a Story in 10 minutes, and I'll introduce Every Tree Tells a Story and me, and I'm going to share you about our postcard project that is about gathering stories of relationships to trees, and then I'll tell you how to follow our story and its next steps. So, who am I and what is Every Tree Tells a Story? I'm Dr. James Bonner, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Glasgow, aligned with the Gallant project. I'm also a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Strathclyde on Every Tree Tells a Story. So I work across these two institutions in Glasgow. Generally, I'm interested in social ecological relationships, especially in urban settings. And my current projects are all about trees, water and cycling. Every Tree Tells a Story is a collective project founded in Glasgow that gathers and shares knowledge and stories about trees. It's a partnership between Strathclyde, Glasgow, and Glasgow City Council and other friends. And we seek to develop storytelling, knowledge sharing, along with schools, communities, artists, activists, scientists, and policymakers. And today I really just want to share with you our postcard project where we gather stories of relationship to trees. And these are some photographs of me participating in this project. And this is just a visual representation really of the kind of approach we take to this research. So on the top left, we have several hundred postcards that have been designed by a local designer. You can see the beautiful picture on the front and they're blank on the back. And essentially, we take these postcards out and we seek to gather stories around trees. So on the bottom right is an example of me just speaking to someone at an event, sharing with them a postcard, asking them to fill out some stories around what trees mean to them. Is there a specific tree that they care for? They have memories of trees, but what are their associations and relationships to trees? The bottom left is just a picture of, we'll just leave a card with someone and just let them write a story in their own time. Top right is a couple of post boxes, which I have had made up, which are from recycled planks of wood. And we ask people just to pop their postcard in these boxes. And the center picture just demonstrates some of the postcards we get back, which just tell us some beautiful stories. And so today I'm just going to share with you some of those stories, particularly ones that relate to the city. There's not going to be many academic references in this presentation at all, but this is just one that I like, and I'll read it out. Place is a special kind of object. It's a concentration of value, though not a valued thing that can be handled or carried about easily. It's an object in which one can dwell. And this idea of dwelling or being is an important part of how we think about place. And I kind of want to open up the contribution of trees to how we think about being in place. So this is the first postcard I want to share with you. And I'm just going to read it out. So I've highlighted in bold some of I feel the kind of important aspects that come from these postcards. And I'll read this to you now. I love trees. I think they are so powerful in creating places and cities where people want to hang out. They change the atmosphere over space and bring character. Studying civil engineering with architecture, I'm fascinated by how trees and green spaces can have an impact and change the feel of a space. I think with trees and plants, etc., there's a sense of connection to nature. This is why houseplants are so popular, and on a sunny day, everyone flocks to the park. When I was younger, a great memory I have is building a tree house in a tree near my home with a good friend, and it's still there today. That tree is iconic. I hate it when I see a tree getting chopped down, especially when it has clearly been growing for a long time. I have a connection with them, and I know everyone else does, even if they don't realise. As I said before, I love trees. And here's just a few more little stories. Love all the trees in and around Glasgow. It's so nice to see green open spaces and not just a concrete jungle. I have a huge tree just outside my window, which is home to a couple of magpies. I sit at and watch on a horrible grey day coming and going, hopping on the branches. Can sit for hours, makes me feel calm and happy. Green space is incredibly important to me, and it is something I think should be valued by society. It's always invoked a feeling of calm and clarity. I often find myself seeking out nature when I need to think or to centre myself. On my first holiday abroad post-COVID, I remember being amazed by the trees in Granada and Valencia. We had already been to Barcelona and Madrid, but Valencia was my favourite because of the park that runs through the heart of the city on a drained riverbed. The streets are also lined with enormous palm trees. To me, these urban trees represent a different way of using public space, one that's built for people, for density, and for living rather than sprawling cars. And just finally, this one in red, just to highlight that stories around trees are not always positive. This person had said, if completely surrounded all the time by trees, this can feel claustrophobic. Trees and leaves can cause problems in storms. And this just finally, just one more story that came from someone recalling trees during COVID times. Trees mean a great deal to me. I live next to the Bluebell Woods in Drumchapel, where I often frequent for exercise and silence. During lockdown, the woods were a godsend to me with no planes flying over. It meant tranquility and permitted me time to sit and admire the landscape. Wildlife was so beautiful as it was the beginning of spring 2020, and activity in the woods was just happening. Deer, squirrels, foxes, birds, insects, all out to play. It was surreal as the silence was just amazing. The only negative object was the electric pylons, horrible objects. So I just kind of have pointed those out because I think a lot of these talk about the value of trees and place and the importance of those. I'm just going to share a couple more postcards we've collected. These were from around the University of Strathclyde's campus in the city centre of Glasgow. And these talk of some of the deeper connections to trees. This was actually the very first postcard I collected, either by someone who was sitting in the university campus. I don't know if they were working for the university or if a member of the public, but this is what they said. In a hectic, fast-paced, stressful world, these trees help ground and centre thoughts and bring a moment of peace and tranquility. The smell of nature and not cars, the sounds of birds and rustling leaves and not engines or machines, the dappled light broken by the leaves and not fluorescent bulbs. The trees are a reminder of natural beauty and order in a world that often feels unstable with an uncertain future, and a reminder to stop overthinking and exist in the moment away from the concerns of work. But trees also are often linked to symbolically, and this one was by a student who was just sitting under some trees. And they said, every year during autumn, the trees shed their orange leaves and return for new green leaves. They change every year the same way we do. They leave their orange leaves behind them in the past. This resembles me starting uni and leaving my school years behind me. The trees above me are the trees I'll see for the next 4 years while at uni. And these two postcards actually inspired something for us to do at the university, and in which we set up a campus tree trail from Every Tree Tells a Story to encourage staff, students, members of the public to explore our campus and some trees which we found that are particularly beautiful on campus, and kind of opening up the health and well-being impacts or benefits of being amongst trees, but also building on that relationship between people and nature. You can visit our tree trail if you're ever in Glasgow. You can see the link here. And just sort of finally, I'm going to share a few more postcards, again linking to that symbolic association with trees. Trees and life is one of these symbolic connections which often go together. I feel alive around trees. Where would we be without them? I feel like being in a forest. I'm home. I can breathe, and the sound of wind in the trees seems calming and soothing. I feel the rush of history, but I also feel my bones deep sadness when trees are being cut down, removed from their habitat, would inevitably contribute to others' habitat. A tree helps the planet become alive. Trees are our lungs for us. If you hug a tree, you feel good, energy back at you. Trees are the future. They are our legacy for our grandchildren to provide a safer environment for everyone and breathe life into new generations. And we have various stories like this. We have trees with other meanings. I'll just pass over some of these because we have lots of stories. People who will provide us pictures of stories, which are beautiful. And some other stories that just kind of pierce your heart. This one, which I received, which says, for years, I went on a hill that had one tree on top. I imagined myself and my love there. Finally, I met with her and went there together. I proposed her in the silence of nature under that tree. That dream came true. And then just a very final little story, which I really love. Trees, they've always brought me a sense of peace, companions through lonely times and many forest walks, seeking comfort, a hand in the rough bark of an ancient tree, like a constant steady present, full of mysteries and the knowledge of countless years, awe-inspiring, ever-changing, each tree incredibly unique and part of a fascinating community, symbols of freedom, resilience, and the wonder of nature. So that's just a few of our stories. Here is some of our kind of contact information. You can go on Twitter and Instagram to follow some of our stories. I will just say thank you. I'll leave it there. Look forward to answering some of your questions later, if you will, and I'll pass back to Anna.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. That was really great. Okay, we'll just move on to our last speaker then, who is Karina Corada-Perez, and she's giving a presentation entitled "How Do Urban Trees Clean Our Air?" So you can take it away.
Okay. Thank you. I will share my screen now. So, as James said, trees are wonderful. But I want to know if this tree can help us to improve air quality. So, well, air pollution. Despite ongoing improvement in air quality, air pollution is still a major health concern. The recent report of the World Health Organization mentioned that 99% of our global population breathe air that exceeds the guideline limits, containing high levels of high pollutants. And air pollution can affect everyone at every stage of our life. So the health effects of air pollution are complex, and prolonged exposure can cause serious medical conditions like heart attack, stroke, respiratory conditions, cardiovascular disease, and lung cancer. And also there is emerging literature that evidence the association with air pollution with dementia. So it's a huge problem here. And it seems that trees or any kind of green infrastructure can help us, if we planted that in our street, can help us to reduce our exposure to air pollution and improve our air. And this idea is extended beyond academia, and many community groups, authorities, organizations, trying to promote plant trees around our city with this idea to reduce our exposure to air pollutants and improve our air. So many projects are related with increase or cover green areas, plant more trees, have more green walls, green roofs, shrubs, trees in our street. But really, how this green infrastructure can improve air quality in our street? So, motivated by this question, I complete my PhD, and I define each mechanism by which green infrastructure, specific trees, can interact and influence air quality. And I define 4 different types of mechanisms. I study each one. And after that, I conducted literature review, systematic literature review for each mechanism to describe and find different green infrastructure characteristics that mean intrinsic, owner from the trees or plant and leaf, and also how the local context influence each characteristic, each mechanism, sorry. So, for example, is deposition, and deposition is how particles are deposited on leaf or trunks or branches and reduce from the air these particles. So microstructure of leaf, like this little hair, trichins, or roughness, can improve this removal of particles, and also the type of leaf can influence, and the macrostructure of the vegetation, like porosity, the height of the species, the type, leaf area density, also influence this mechanism. And the local context, like the pollutant concentration around when we plant trees, is important for the position mechanism, the meteorological parameters, and the pollutant fraction. Is PM10, is PM 2.5. Also, absorption. Absorption is not only for carbon dioxide, but also through these little porous, other kind of gases are also absorbed by the plant. These little pore, called stoma, influence in the absorption of different gases. So the stomal density and the type of foliage is important for the absorption of gases in this mechanism. As well, the meteorological parameter like temperature and water regulate this gas exchange, the temperature, the vegetation area, and the pollutant chemistry, what type of gas is absorbed by leaf. Dispersion is how this pollutant is dispersed or diluted when they found a green infrastructure in front. And this kind mechanism is very important when we plant trees in our street. The type of green infrastructure, not only trees, also green roof and green walls, also affect the dispersion of pollutant. You can accumulate, for example, pollutant if the canopy is too big in a narrow street. So the type of green infrastructure, the porosity, the crown, the height, the thickness of the green infrastructure of the trees is important to consider if you are planting trees with this objective of reduce air pollutants. The street configuration is an avenue where it's a narrow street. It's quite important, as well the wind direction and velocity of the street, and the location of the green infrastructure or trees. Is in the middle, is in one side of the tree, is in both sides. It's quite important. And finally, the other mechanism that I found was biogenic emission. Not only trees can capture pollutant, also they emit biogenic gases or particles. These gases are for communication and for protection of the species. But the problem with this is that can trigger in photochemical reactions. So you can have, if you plant a species that protect themselves too much, they can contribute with other pollutants like ozone. So it's important to consider the amount of the biogenic emission that the tree has, and pollen. So here the taxonomic and origin pattern, like is deciduous, is evergreen, the age of the tree, the macrostructure, again, the crown of the species is very important to consider, and the meteorological parameters, the pollutant concentration around, plant damage and maintenance is quite important to consider to reduce biogenic emission and control these kind of gases, particles, natural particles. So the last year, there are some important evidence that there are other research groups that are trying to create this holistic view of trees to create a more comprehensive study of trees in our street. But here, how, with all this information, how I can contribute to making better decision making for urban planners. So I create in this framework that help practitioners to use trees with this objective to improve air quality and work from the outer circle to the inner one. So first, it's so important to consider the context where you are planting, and then the green infrastructure characteristic of the tree characteristic, and then you can maximize its mechanism using the study of the species and the local context. So to finish, I think the potential of green infrastructure or trees to positively influence urban air quality depend on several species-specific characteristics and also the local context. It's not simple. So it's not only planned because it's green, they have to be a meaning, they have to be a study of this, and different micro and micro characteristics of the species are important to consider, and as well the local context like height, density, the type of tree, the use of the tree, and also the closer of tree or the green infrastructure in the pollution sources, the greater will be the blocking effect, and you, in that case, you will reduce and improve air quality. But if not, it's so difficult to find if the tree can have some effect on our street. So thank you, and I hope you have many questions. I stopped sharing them.
That's great. Thanks, Karina. So yeah, we'll open the floor up for questions. I think there's been a couple of questions in the chat. There was a question for Alejandra, asking about how you got the tree diversity information, and if it's available.
Yeah. It is publicly available. It's a very interesting study that was done by Forest Research in collaboration with Tree Economics. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Start my video. Okay, I'm here. Sorry. So it's a very detailed study. It's quite interesting. It's publicly available. It was, maybe I can put down in the chat box. In questions and answers, maybe?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So the author, oh God, I can't, I put it on the general chat because that thing is not really working with me. It's Forest Research. Economics. By Heather Rumble and co-authors. I think the title is Valuing Urban Trees in Glasgow. Along the lines, and they also provide a detailed list of species that have been found, how they did it. It's really great research, I think, great report.
Brilliant, thanks. There was also questions about ash dieback disease, Alejandra, and wondering if you have a view on the impact of ash dieback on Glasgow's tree offer.
I don't know exactly how intense the impact is on the trees of Glasgow. I know ash is the most common tree species in Glasgow. It has, it's huge. And the dieback is a cause of a fungi infection that is a problem all across Europe. What increases the vulnerability of trees to be more prone to be infected by these fungi? I'm not sure. I think that the main cause is a lot of trade. So this fungi has been imported into Europe. It is a really big concern. I would say environmental conditions would also affect the vulnerability, but I'm not really sure how it's happening.
Okay. Yeah, there was another question for Karina. What is the likely difference between a large tree and a green roof or screen in terms of their effectiveness in reducing pollution?
Yeah, well, is a lot because they influence the wind directions and the wind velocity of trees. I mean, pollutants. So when you have, for example, is a big tree. Well, the pollution is not the same to pedestrian level that the roof level. They reduce and they disperse. So the idea of have more green roof to remove pollutant, for example, is not a great idea. However, the green roof can affect temperatures, and that affect as well the pollutant concentration or the mass of air, how move through the city of the or through a street. Then you have green walls, and green walls for surface, they can capture more pollutant than one tree, for example, in our street. So there are many different between different green infrastructure. It's not the same. And it's not the same in the location of this green infrastructure as well, how they can influence air quality. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. I can't see any other questions on the chat at the moment. Sorry, I think there's some on the Q&A. Just have a look there. There we go. I think this is for Ali again. Is there any other known research methods of retaining the health of the ash, allowing them to bounce back? Many Friends of Parks groups?
I am not an expert on ash trees, I'm sorry, but there is ongoing research. There is a study analyzing the evolutionary divergence of the fungi that are affecting the trees and how they reached Europe. There has to be some response on trees. Also, tree diversity will highly determine the response to pathogens. That would be an interesting line of research if there is a population of ash trees that is found to be more resistant. That would help, but I think I am not the right one to address the ash tree. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I've got a question for James here. What's James's favorite tree and how does he connect to it?
How to pick a favorite tree? I love all the trees. I do have a favorite tree, which is in my local park, the Glasgow Green in the city. And I've been photographing it from the same spot for the last 5 years, most days really that I pass it. And I guess that's how I connect, but also just go to it, you know, touch it, you know, put your hand on its trunk and look at it, think about how it changes over the year. I collect leaves from it, I make things from it. And to me, that's a way of building a relationship. Go when you're happy, go when you're sad. But I think this is an important point. It sounds something a bit strange, but it's fine. But I think there's an important kind of philosophical point here is that, you know, underpinning a lot of this is about sustainability solutions and possibilities are about recognizing our connection to nature, that we're part of nature. We're not out with nature. We're part of these socio-ecological ecosystems we're part of. And I think what every tree tells a story tries to entice out through the stories is that, you know, people feel a relationship to trees, and it's all right to talk about that. And this is at the fundamentals of making sustainability issues much more fundamentally part of how we think of the world and are part of it. And any solutions we have in the future are going to depend on that and recognizing that link. So yeah, I do have a favorite tree, but don't tell the other trees that.
So there's another question for you, James. Which ecosystem services feature most on the postcards, or is it just about well-being? Or
you know, we're going to do a bit of the sorting. We're still going to go through the kind of looking at the postcards, and we're going to have an event in January. We're going to kind of review the themes of the postcards. But I think what comes from them, because we frame them as kind of cultural and social interactions, the meanings and relationships, it's that aspect of ecosystem services. And I think there's a lot of attention on the provisioning and side of things, the kind of ecological aspects, the kind of utilitarian aspects of ecosystem services. And really this wants to open up that other space, the social and cultural. And I think that's the power of the postcard methodology, because it allows space for people to talk in those terms that some other methodologies don't really allow for. You know, even qualitative methods such as surveys often can be quite restricted. But the space that this allows for, I think, lets people and kind of validates people to talk in these terms. So it's really those cultural and social associations that really comes to the forefront, and those intrinsic values of trees, which are really important and often not given the voice, I feel, that they merit.
Great. There was a question for Karina. Does recommendation read green infrastructure trees also take into account potential future climate changes?
Yes. Well, there are some recommendation, but depend again what you need. If you would like to improve region scale air pollution, for example, you need more green areas like parks or a small pocket of trees or vegetation around city. But if you want to have a great impact on climate change or reduce pollutant in a specific street, for example, or reduce air pollution for pedestrians, you have to go for other kind of vegetation, not only trees. And increase as well the diversity of species is so important. We need more deciduous and evergreen species, shrubs, of course, in our street, and not only focus on air pollution, but all many other ecosystem services. But the thing here is thinking what is the best species that they need and what is the purpose of that species in that place. Is not because it's green we need more green, or more trees. Maybe we need a specific species or a specific green infrastructure for reduce flooding or improve air quality or reduce temperature. So if we are thinking strategically how we can use green infrastructure or trees in our street on our cities, that is the discussion. It's not create more green areas because it's nice, because it's nice to have more green areas. But now we have to go in deep and think what is the main species or green infrastructure that we need and what is the purpose of that.
Great. Thanks.
I think Alejandra has something to say.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I just want to complement your comment, Karina, because I think what you say is quite relevant. It's not looking only at one species, only what it can provide, but probably it would be even more valuable to look at the interactions with different plants and what the final ecosystem service is. I think that one of the main failures of humankind at managing systems is trying to use monocultures. When we focus our interest in only one, we lose a lot of interactions, and by losing interactions, we lose services as well.
Yeah,
very true. James, just want to say something?
Just really to kind of build on that, is in that interaction, I think is so important, and recognizing humans, we're part of that. We're part of that interaction. So that's something I really want to put in. And if we can see that wider community of us as part of the tree community and trees as part of our society, I think we're really getting at some of the fundamentals here.
Great. I think we've just got time for one more question, and it's just one question on the Q&A there. For James, can you speak about the spin-off every cycle Cycle Tells a Story and link to UCI?
I can very briefly, yeah. We're starting to use the same methodology that we've used the postcards to link to the forthcoming UCI World Cycling Championships. We're coming to Glasgow in Scotland in August next year, a huge event in Glasgow. My other passion, trees, water, cycling, how good. We're starting to think, how do people think about cycling? How do people think about place more widely? And I think there's a real interaction there. So I like this methodology we're using. I think it really opens up spaces in many ways. We could talk about air, we could talk about water, we could talk about how people relate to place more widely. So keep an eye out for On Every Tree Tells a Story About Every Cycle Tells a Story with the UCI coming next year. And, you know, please share stories with us. Lots of exciting things to come. Bike and trees, I mean, that's it, really, for me.
Brilliant. I think that's all we've got time for, but thanks to everyone for coming. We have a number of sessions planned, and our next Urban by Nature Lunch and Learn will take place on the Thursday, the 9th of February at 2023. Thursday, the 9th of February in 2023 at noon. And the theme is the water environment, chaired by Dr. Thorsten Balk, Senior Lecturer in Physical Geography and Landscape Ecology at the University of Glasgow. And registration is now open for this. But please get in touch if you have any suggestions for future themes. And yeah, so this talk will be available on the Urban by Nature YouTube channel. But thanks for joining, and I hope this has been useful, and that we see you again on the 9th of February. Yeah, cheers.